A cold wind rattled the windows of the small, dimly lit hospital room, carrying with it a sense of finality. Emily Parker, a dedicated nurse with over a decade of experience, sat beside an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, gently holding her frail hand. The woman's breathing was slow and labored, her once bright eyes clouded with exhaustion. She had no family nearby, no one to take care of her, and yet, despite everything, she managed a weak smile when Emily adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. Emily had always been the kind of nurse who went beyond the call of duty. For her, nursing wasn't just a job. It was a calling. She believed that kindness and compassion were just as essential as medicine, especially for those who had no one else to turn to. So, when she saw Mrs. Thompson struggling to afford basics, care, her heart ached. The elderly woman had been discharged earlier than she should have been, left to fend for herself with no support system. Emily couldn't ignore her suffering. That's why, after her shift ended, she made a decision that would change everything. She visited Mrs. Thompson at her tiny apartment, bringing her food and checking her vitals. She made sure the woman had her medication, helped clean up her home, and even spent time simply talking with her, something she clearly hadn't had in a long time. It was a small act of kindness, something Emily did purely out of the goodness of her heart. She didn't expect anything in return, but what she never saw coming was the price she would have to pay for it. A few days later, Emily was called into her supervisor's office. The air inside was thick with tension. Her manager, a stern woman named Patricia Monroe, sat behind her desk, flipping through a file with an unreadable expression. "Emily," Patricia said, her voice clipped and cold, "we've received a complaint about you." Emily's heart pounded. A complaint? From whom? She had always been careful, always followed the rules, except for that one time. But surely, helping an elderly woman who had nowhere else to turn couldn't be considered wrong, could it? You provided medical assistance to a patient outside of hospital grounds without authorization. Patricia continued, pushing the file forward. That is a direct violation of policy. Emily swallowed hard. She needed help, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She had no one else. Patricia sighed, her expression remaining unmoved. "It doesn't matter, Emily. You know the rules. We cannot allow staff to offer medical services outside of our facility. It's a liability issue. And more importantly, you didn't charge her." Those words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. "So, if I had made her pay, it would have been fine?" she asked, disbelief creeping into her voice. Patricia didn't respond right away. Instead, she tapped her pen against the desk, as if choosing her words carefully. "It's not about the money," she finally said. "It's about maintaining professional boundaries. You acted outside of your role, and we cannot overlook that. Effective immediately. You're dismissed." The room fell silent. Emily felt the ground shift beneath her. Just like that, everything she had worked for, her career, her passion, her livelihood, was gone, all because she chose to do the right thing. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She stood up slowly, her hands shaking, and took one last look around the office that had once been a place of purpose for her. Without another word, she walked out. The news spread quickly through the hospital. Some of her co-workers whispered in hushed tones. Others avoided eye contact altogether. A few nurses who knew Emily well expressed their outrage, but none of them could do anything to change what had happened. The hospital's decision was final. Emily left that day with nothing but the clothes on her back and the weight of injustice pressing down on her shoulders. She had sacrificed everything to help someone in need, and now She was paying the ultimate price, but what she didn't know was that fate had other plans for her. Because just days later, something happened that no one saw coming. Emily sat in her small apartment, staring blankly at the cup of tea growing cold between her hands. It had been 3 days since she was fired, and the reality of it still hadn't fully settled in. She had spent years dedicating herself to her work, to her patients, to the very idea that nursing was about care first and policy second. But none of that had mattered. One decision, one moment of kindness, had cost her everything, she thought. About Mrs. Thompson. Had she known what happened? Had someone told her? The thought made Emily's chest tighten. The elderly woman had no idea that accepting help had come with such a price. But Emily didn't regret it, not for a second. Her phone vibrated on the table, pulling her from her thoughts. She hesitated before picking it up, surprised to see a text from Claire, one of the nurses she used to work with. "Claire, you need to see this. Check the hospital's page." Emily frowned and quickly pulled up the hospital's website. What she saw made her heart stop. A post had been made about her dismissal, but not by the hospital itself. Someone, maybe a patient, maybe a co-worker, had leaked the story online. It wasn't just a short message either. It was a detailed account of what had happened. How she had been fired for helping an elderly woman who couldn't afford care. And people were furious. The comment section was filled with outrage. Patients who had once been in Emily's care shared their experiences, talking about the kindness she had shown them, the time she had gone above and beyond to make sure they were okay. Strangers were calling out the hospital, accusing them of valuing profits over people. Some even mentioned taking action, demanding answers from the administration. Emily's hands trembled as she scrolled through the messages. She had never expected this. She had assumed she would simply disappear from the hospital, forgotten over time. But now, her story was out in the world, and people weren't willing to let it go. Just then, another message popped up. This one wasn't from Claire. It was from an unknown number. Unknown. Meet me at the cafe on 5th. It's important. Emily hesitated. Who was this? And why did they want to meet her? Her gut told her to be cautious, but something about the timing made her feel like she couldn't ignore it. With nothing left to lose, she grabbed her coat and headed out. The cafe was quiet when she arrived, the soft hum of conversation blending with the clinking of cups and silverware. She scanned the room and immediately spotted a familiar face sitting in the corner. Daniel Carter, a journalist known for exposing corruption in the healthcare system. Emily's stomach twisted. She had seen his work before. He was relentless, never backing down from a story, no matter how powerful the people involved were. And now he was looking right at her. She approached cautiously, and as soon as she sat down, he slid a folder across the table. "I assume you've seen the reactions online," he said, his tone calm but serious. Emily nodded. "I didn't expect any of it." Daniel leaned forward. "That's just the beginning. Your story struck a nerve. People are angry, but they don't have the full picture yet. That's why I'm here." He tapped the folder. "I've been investigating your hospital for months. There's more going on than just your case." Emily's heartbeat quickened. "What do you mean?" Daniel exhaled, choosing his words carefully. "Your firing wasn't just about breaking policy. The hospital has been under scrutiny for quietly cutting costs at the expense of patient care. You weren't the first nurse to be punished for putting people over profit. They're making examples out of people like you to keep others in line." Emily's stomach dropped. She had known the hospital had its flaws. Every institution did. But this was bigger than she had imagined. Daniel studied her reaction. "I want to expose the full story," he said. "But I need you to be a part of it. Your voice matters in this." Emily hesitated. Speaking out meant putting herself at even greater risk. But as she thought about Mrs. Thompson, about the patients who had defended her online, about the other nurses who might be suffering in silence, she realized she couldn't walk away from this. She took a deep breath and met Daniel's gaze. "Tell me what I need to do." He nodded, sliding another paper toward her. "First, we make sure the truth gets out, all of it." But neither of them had any idea what they were about to uncover, or how dangerous it would become. Emily sat across from Daniel, her fingers gripping the edges of the paper he had given her. The weight of what she was about to do settled heavily on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't just about losing her job or standing up for one patient. If what Daniel said was true, then countless others, nurses, doctors, patients, had suffered under the same system. And if she stayed silent, it would keep happening. Daniel pulled out his recorder and placed it between them. "Whenever you're ready," he said. Emily swallowed hard, then started to speak. She told him everything. About Mrs. Thompson, about the unfair dismissal, about how the hospital had placed profits over care. She spoke about the unspoken fear among staff, how nurses worried more about breaking policies than actually helping people in need. As the words poured out, she realized just how much she had held in, how much injustice had gone unchecked. Daniel listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. When she finished, he leaned back, studying her. "This is powerful," he said, "but it's not enough." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" He slid another document toward her. "I have internal reports," he said. "Whistleblowers. Emails from management discussing budget cuts. Pressuring staff to discharge patients early. Penalizing those who question it. Your case is just one example. But this proves it's a pattern." Emily's breath caught. If this got out, it wouldn't just be about her story anymore. It would be about exposing the hospital's entire system. The article went live the next morning. The headline was sharp and direct. "Hospital fires nurse for helping patient. The shocking truth behind its profit-first policies." Within hours, it spread like wildfire. News stations picked it up, social media exploded, and people began demanding answers. Former employees came forward with their own experiences, confirming what Daniel had found. Some shared how they had been forced to discharge patients who clearly weren't ready. Others admitted they had been too scared to speak up, fearing they would end up like Emily. And then something unexpected happened. Mrs. Thompson's story reached a local charity that specialized in elderly care. They stepped forward, not only offering her the support she needed, but also shining a light on the growing crisis of abandoned seniors. Donations poured in, people offered to help, and for the first time in a long while, Mrs. Thompson wasn't alone. The pressure on the hospital grew unbearable. Protests formed outside its doors. Patients and families demanded transparency, and news reporters pressed for answers. Finally, after weeks of silence, the hospital released a statement. They called Emily's dismissal a misunderstanding, claiming they would review internal policies to ensure compassionate care wasn't compromised. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Trust had been broken. A few days later, Emily received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Ms. Parker," a familiar voice said. It was Patricia Monroe, her former supervisor. Emily stayed silent. A sigh came from the other end. "I wanted to say, I was wrong," Patricia admitted. "I was just following orders. I should have fought harder for you." Emily wasn't sure what to say. She had spent so much time feeling angry, betrayed, and now, hearing Patricia's voice, laced with regret, she realized something. This wasn't just about individual people making bad choices. It was about a system that had forced good people to do the wrong thing. I hope you find a place where you can actually help people. Patricia continued. The way you were meant to. Emily hung up, not out of anger, but because she already knew her answer. She wasn't going back. A week later, she stood in front of a small but growing clinic, one that had reached out to her after hearing her story. They wanted nurses who believed in patient-first care, who saw medicine as more than just a business. She took a deep breath before stepping inside. This was the beginning of something new. Maybe she had lost her job, but she had gained something. Even more important, her purpose.